Okay, so the topic we did was competition. To start off, there's intraspecific versus interspecific competition. Intraspecific competition is when the same species compete for limited resources. This leads to a reduction in fitness for both individuals. Individuals can compete for food, water, space, light, mates, or any other resource which is required for survival or reproduction. The resource must be limited for competition to occur. An example of this is male zebras fighting to defend their territories. Now for interspecific competition. This is a form of competition between different species inhabiting the same ecological area. An example of this is tree species in a dense forest growing taller than the surrounding tree species. This lets the higher tree species absorb more light than the lower growing tree species.
Interference competition. This is competition in which two or more individuals are directly interacting with one another. This kind of competition is where you see individuals fighting for a limited resource. Interference competition can be intraspecific, such as when larger aphids shove smaller aphids off of their feeding site. Interference competition can also be interspecific, such as when a cardinal and blue jay fight over the same seeds. Allelopathy is another type of interference competition where an organism produces chemicals that influence the germination, growth, survival, and reproduction of other organisms. An example of this is when grass can't grow underneath a tree because of chemicals produced in the roots or leaves of the tree that make the ground underneath it uninhabitable. Exploitative competition is competition in which two or more individuals are indirectly interacting with one another. One individual consumes the limited resource before the other. It can also be intraspecific or interspecific. One example of this is when taller plants reach and use sunlight before shorter plants, resulting in the shorter plants being shaded out and dying. Another example is when a rabbit eats all of the preferred flowers before another rabbit could find and eat them. In both examples, two organisms were not directly interacting with each other, but instead one was using up the resource before the second had a chance to.
Competitive exclusion. The competitive exclusion principle is when two species cannot coexist indefinitely on the same limiting resource. Making a scenario, species A eats aloe and species B eats the same aloe species. In 1 square mile, there are only 50 aloe plants with 15 individuals of both species. Species A is a better competitor than species B when finding the aloe. In this case, the aloe is the limiting resource for both species, and when they compete to eat the plant, there are two possible outcomes following the competitive exclusion principle. So this is going to be species A and species B and the aloe. Outcome 1 is that competitive exclusion will occur on one of the species. This means that the weaker competitor will become locally extinct, also known as being extirpated. In this case, species A is a better competitor than species B, so species B will become locally extinct in this 1 square mile. The second outcome is coexistence via resource partitioning. This will mean that both species will adapt to eat the plant and avoid one another. There are 3 ways this partitioning can be done. Physical attributes, such as only a certain size of aloe or the color of the aloe. Spatial attributes, only choosing an aloe based on location, so close to a cactus or in an open area. Or a temporal attribute, only choosing aloe during the dry season or only in June. Further partitioning can occur through adaptive evolution. So there are morphology differences, change in the headship to make digging up the aloe and consuming the whole thing easier, physiology differences such as change in offspring to eat during different seasons or in different areas, and behavioral differences eating at night or day. So behavioral differences can be either a fixed behavior or a learned response. Learned responses can actually be changed when one species is removed from that 1 square mile and the other species can eat all day, or a fixed behavior is when one species will only eat during night despite whoever is present.